Welcome to this video. This is will be a philosophical book talk about actually two books. We have this philosophical health, thinking as a way of healing, and the other book is also called philosophical health, a practical introduction. And I got the author of one of the books, but he also has yeah, that's the other book. But we got Luis de Miranda here. I hope I pronounce your name correctly.
It's
And
fine.
good. And who is Luis de Miranda? He is a senior research fellow at the University Philosophy Department, University of what's it called, Turku in Finland. And you're also a philosophical practitioner, a philosophical counselor, which is the same as me. One of my part-time jobs is a philosopher as a philosophical counselor.
Mhm.
Uh, would you like to add anything to your introduction here?
Just perhaps say that I am the author of these books because we could talk about books that have been authored by someone else, right? So in this case, the orange book that I've shown, Philosophical Health, a practical introduction. I wanted to explain how I have organized the idea of philosophical health in a method with six senses. I think we'll go into this later. And the other book is an anthology that I edited with various authors. I contributed myself. It's a more academic, scientific book
It is.
on the practical concept of philosophical health, but I think also very useful for counseling.
Yes, I would say both of them are. I read both of them, and there's a lot of contributors. This all of them are philosophical counselors who use
Most of them, yeah.
and most of them use psychology and philosophy and all kinds of methods.
Right.
For this philosophical health, we will get into that. What that
Right.
even mean
Mhm.
for you? Uh, And then there's the practical introduction, which is only written by you, and that's very interesting. I found that really exciting to really get to know your approach and your thoughts about this philosophical health and how to become philosophical healthy. But let's get in to this discussion here.
Mhm.
Questions for you, and
Okay.
of course it could go all kinds of places. This
Mhm.
process of having a philosophical conversation. So let's see if we get all the questions or more. Let's see what
Mhm.
happens. And
Sounds
uh,
good.
and of course, I would also like to thank you very much for participating in this
My
conversation.
pleasure.
This is my first on this channel, a first
Mm.
unedited talk.
Right. No, but that's great. And I like and edited. I like spontaneity, improvisation. For example, I think it's a very significant fact that you are a counselor also like me. And one of the things I noticed is that that's the main reason why I created a method is that there are great counselors all over the world
Mhm.
where but most of the time they use a very intuitive method. Sometimes it's called beyond method. So I don't know how you work, but very often it's like more, and it kind of works. But I really believe that the practice of philosophical counseling can be of great use for society. But if you look at history, we see that it goes up and down in the last 20 years when it started, 30 years. And my main explanation for that is that it's because
Mhm.
there it's not standardized in the sense that they're not common methods that are adopted. So on the way, it's good. because we don't want it to be too rigid, too institutionalized. But on another way, there's an obstacle because I think that then the counseling sessions are too dependent from the personality of the counselor. And then, well, if it's a good fit with the counselee, then that's great. Sometimes it's not a good fit. The other thing is that there's a lot of people who actually feel would benefit from it and would like to have philosophical counseling, but they do not know that the offer is there. And so by having a method that is common, that would allow more communication, more, clarity on what is this about. And of course, then what is important is that I often say that physical health and psychological health, the way they're practiced today, are very normative. And we want to avoid that. In my view, philosophical health needs to be pluralistic. So we do not want a very rigid method. So we want a method that is semi-structured. That
Yeah.
is, that a method that is welcoming all sorts of types of people that all very often did not have access to philosophy. So we want to take them gently, and we'll come back to that, to the details of the method that takes them gently from their own bodily experience slowly to the levels of the philosophical sense. And so, in that sense, I felt that while respecting the diversity, the plurality of approaches, my work is also to try to create some sort of commonality, a method that then can be upscaled in the future. And just to finish on this, I am actually currently training 3 counselors in the SMILE method. And
Yeah.
I didn't plan that. They came to me and I said, okay, so I designed a training program, which is 16 sessions, because I don't believe in weekends where, you know, you do 2 afternoons and then you tell people that they are philosophical counselors. This I don't believe in that, but I have designed this 16 sessions. It takes several months, but these 3 people are doing it, and I would like to do it more for another reason that I will keep a little bit secret for the teasing part, but I will tell
Yeah.
you later.
Yeah. Uh, uh, as you mentioned, there's a lot of other counselors in this book, most of them, but the kind of there's one level at this book is also that they're all kind of responding to something you have written about philosophical health or philosophical
Right,
counseling. There's a lot of where they say, well, Louis Miranda, he
right.
says this, and then they respond to that.
Yeah, and this was not planned, but it's great. It turned out to be great for the the critical thinking, the scientific advance. Is like they took my propositions seriously, and they say, okay, is this coherent? Where is this coherent? Where we
Mm.
would have more questions, etc. So it's really about it's really a first scholarly work that creates a field. In fact, we will see how it expands, but the book is already being translated in other languages. What
Right.
is important is that I think this is both a field of research, it's very important, and a field of practice.
Yeah. Uh, as you say, there's a lot of this is an expanding field. This philosophical counseling. It's kind of new for many. Also for me, when I got into it, I started reading Lou Marinoff
Right.
from the America, and so that's kind of my beginnings. And then I'm what's called a protreptic counselor who
Mhm.
use protreptics, and it kind of goes back to Aristotle, but it was an approach that was elaborated and continued by a Danish philosopher here in Denmark, a professor of philosophy who developed his own counseling method from this ancient protreptic approach. So
Perhaps you should
kind of my
say more about.
background.
Perhaps you should say a little bit more about it for the people who listen to us and might not
Yeah,
be familiar with
yeah.
this
I made
technical word.
a video about it, but
Okay,
they
fair enough.
can always take that out. But the main thing here about protreptic, it means something like being turned on yourself. It's kind of like it's also
Right.
called the mirror of kings, where you kind of uh, are confronted with your own words. Uh, it dates back to Aristotle because supposedly he used that method on his greatest pupil Alexander the Great in order for him to be a better, a greater leader, a more moral leader. He was confronted and turned his own words on himself. But it's also very Socratic in this sense. Socrates, when he went around in Athens, he could ask, what is justice? And there was always some guy coming around saying, I know what justice is. And then he starts speaking about justice, and then Socrates kind of turns that what the person said about justice kind of against himself. Well, it has developed since then because there's something in the Socratic approach that is kind of defensive. You can say it. It's that Socrates is he's
He's not the most
it's a
gentle.
bit aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that some people, I mean, he's rather polite in the dialogues, in the Platonic dialogues, which might seem artificial because, I mean, he's a bit surrounded by idiots, and so it's, it
Yeah.
feels like, but that's, I mean, that's of course part of the theater,
Yeah.
and but as you see, so there are different approaches, and one of the things I've noticed is that while the community of philosophical counselors is quite young, it basically started very slowly in the 80s. As you know, we're not going to get in the history. That's uh, partly in the books. But what is important is that I think they're great people. It's a great intention. And we as a community, we should show that we're philosophically healthy in the
Wow.
sense that we should show that we are open to other people's methods, that we respect each other more. I think our duty is to show that we have an ethos of respect and co-admiration and kindness that is superior to, say, the group of wind engineering, etc., right? Because it's philosophical counseling. I think that's mostly the case, but I also think that we already start seeing sort of factions, right? People who say no, philosophical health is therapy. Other people say no, I don't talk to you. It's not therapy. So I think that is a little bit ridiculous because given the fact it's still very it's a small community. Most people don't even know about it. So I think we should more look at what we have in common than what I mean. I can quote. I know I will not name, but I've had one of the names that is important in the community that told me, "Oh, I will not speak of health. I don't even talk to you because you use the term health."
Oh.
Uh, so childish behavior that is not acceptable in a philosophical community. So what we need to do is really, because at the end of the day, what we do is very similar, even if we call it differently and we might give technical names, right? But what we do is we help people reflect on their purpose in life, take a long-term overview on the motivations of their actions and the alignment between their view upon life, their worldview, which they're not most of the time not aware of. So we need to help them clarify their worldview. And then the alignment between this and their choices in life.
Yeah,
Uh, and I think this is a very important service to society. And one of my goals in the future, I told you this was a little secret, but I can say a bit about it. I am developing a tool to democratize philosophical health, where I will share it with you and others, where I want to create that bridge. I will be able to create the bridge between all the people that might need philosophical counseling, but they don't know about it, and all the philosophical counselors who, let's face it, and I count me in this, are not very good at marketing, right? We are
mm.
philosophers. We're not, we don't really like to sell, right?
Oh, oh,
That's why we are philosophers in a way.
yeah,
So so I'm starting to develop a tool, an app that will make this connection and basically democratize in the sense that people will be aware that that exists, and then they can choose different approaches.
that's great.
Uh, so in the sense that and that's also the meaning of the book. I started with the collective book because I wanted to show that, well, see, we can talk about this concept with different opinions. People
Mm,
in the book, they have, right, they have slightly different opinions, but it's a very respectful book uh,
mm,
among these opinions, and I think that's the spirit we should work with
mm.
in the future.
Yeah, but it is very difficult to convey what is philosophical counseling. That's also my problem, and I'm not a salesman, so but it's
Right.
great that you're developing this tool app. Uh, My approach also to this philosophical counseling is know thyself. This ancient Greek saying from isn't it from the temple of Zeus, where it's written know thyself. So that's also
Okay,
my
yeah, that's
approach, that you cannot know what your problems are or your difficulties are, or how to develop from these problems if you don't really know thyself. It's also the ancient, I think it's an ancient saying, if you want love, you also have to love yourself first. You cannot get other people to love you if you don't really love yourself. So,
Mhm.
but
Well, we need
yeah,
to on that matter. So this inscription was famously written in Delphi, where there was a famous
Delphi.
oracle, right? So people came to Delphi and they wanted to ask the oracle, what will the future be? And and I think the inscription is related to that. So it means that, wait a minute, it's a little bit like in AI. You have this book by Stuart Russell, who is one of the popes of AI. Recently, it's called Human Compatible, and saying the problem is not AI. The problem is we humans, we do not know how to define our purposes. So when we ask something to the AI or to the oracle, we don't know how to ask. It's and so I think what know thyself means in that context is, wait a minute, before you act and before you try to anticipate the future, what future do you want? Uh, and I think it's extremely important to have, of course, an aspect in philosophical counseling that is about the self. But I do also, and you read that in the books, I do think that we shouldn't fetishize the self. The self is always in context with others. We inhabit the planet Earth. We are interconnected.
Mm.
So we do not want to get people to be obsessed by their self. And we know also that, well, is the self actually, it's like the injunction of philosophy, think for oneself, right? And it's a beautiful horizon, let's say, but it's more direction than a reality because in fact no one can absolutely think for oneself. First of all, we use a language that we did not invent. We can create new words here and there. I do that also, but most of the time we are embedded, immersed in a culture. So our thinking is a dialectic between our process of autonomization and of course all that we inherit from the world we live in. Same thing for know thyself. I think that there is a paradox in that, right? Because it's a little bit like in quantum physics when you observe particles, you change their behavior. So I
Mm.
do not think
Observer
that
effect.
there's
Yeah.
something as the self that is a fixed object like a precious stone that is hard and there for us to grab. The self is a process that includes the examination itself, right? And and I think what is interesting is that I think a creative, fertile reading of Know Thyself is know what you stand for, right? So it's not about the essence of the self because we are creative, reflexive natures that are constantly in flux, evolving, but we can stand for something in the sense that we decide. So there's a decision at one point, right?
Mm.
Okay, so this is my highest purpose. These are the values I stand for.
Values, yes.
This
Yeah.
is the perspective I take, and then, of course, then we can dig in the concept. Okay, are you brave enough to follow that? That's also part of know thyself, right?
Yeah.
If you're not the hero type, don't try to do hero things, right? You can serve a hero. We cannot all be leaders. There's
No.
another problem today in our society, a very ego trip. I wrote a book called Ego Trip a long time ago
Yeah.
in French. Before Facebook, before all that, I was diagnosing this tendency that we still have very present, right? So people want to have this sort of leader uh, image that usually they do not see that it's more of a duty and a responsibility than a pleasure, and they do not want to do all the hard work of sacrifice that comes with it. And so, for example, sacrifice is a word that is very unpopular today. People think sacrifice. No, but they forgot the real meaning of sacrifice. Sacrifice is not throwing yourself out of a cliff because a leader says to do that. Sacrifice, the root of sacrifice, sacrificere in Latin is to make a sacred space, to make sacred. So
Mm.
by that act of basically committing to what you feel will bring the world to a position where paradise on earth is closer, then there are things that we don't do, and there are things we do more. By the way, and I'll pause here, but this idea of paradise on earth, I think that's one of the core ideas of why philosophy started. Whether it's, let's say, it's with the ancient Greeks, we can debate if because that's one of the main distinctions with religion. Religion often promises you a paradise out of this world,
Afterlife.
whether after you die or blah blah blah. Philosophy says no. It's political. Thinking is political. We
Mm.
can move closer to paradise on earth, and that's what a sense of purpose is something that um, you think a value or an ideal that you believe will bring us closer to paradise on earth.
That's correct. That's also what I believe, that philosophy can make things possible. You can. It's about making a better world. I keep thinking about Marx, and it's not about just thinking about the world. We can change it. We can do something together.
Right.
I want to go back to this what you talked about, values, your personal values, that they come forth in a philosophical counseling session. Uh, it's a difficult question. If you just ask somebody, what are your values? It can be very difficult to articulate.
Right.
But through a philosophical conversation with a counselor, you can get to know these values more,
Mhm.
and ponder about them. Maybe you have to change them. Maybe you don't really believe them when you say them out loud. You can
Mhm.
kind of hear that you're not really mean them, and then we can talk about it.
Right.
There's a lot of things that can happen in a philosophical counseling session. It's a process, really, when it comes to it, that I think I always say to what would you call them, counselors, right?
I call them counselors, yeah,
Yeah.
because
Uh,
I don't want to use the term client,
okay. But
or patient.
yeah, my counselors, I always start before we start the session. I always say that no matter what happens, what we
Right.
really want to talk about, what you really want to talk about, that will come up in this conversation, no
Mhm.
matter what, because it's not always what is said. It is also something that lies between the words, or
First.
behind the words, that what we need to talk about will come up in the conversation. I always start by saying that we must have faith in the process of the conversation.
Mhm. No, but I think what you say about the values is very important because I will show an image here.
Mm,
Um,
thank you.
so one of the reasons, so this is the SMILE method, right? So SMILE PH stands for sense making interviews looking at elements of philosophical health. And so one thing that I find important is epistemic justice, in the sense that most people didn't have the chance to have access to philosophy. It's also a political matter. Most governments in the world do not want their children to learn philosophy. So uh, philosophy teaching in schools and high schools is quite poor. There's
Yeah,
some of it, but we know that children benefit from an introduction to philosophical thinking, of course, at their level from the age of 7, 8, and some experiences have been made. It's called philosophy for children, but they're not adopted. So when we have someone in counseling, I think it's a mistake to start talking about, concepts, values, uh, philosophical views, etc., too early. So the method takes them gently. We start with the bodily sense, and
ah,
that means talking about, what's your relationship with your body? And well, there's a first session of introduction, which is basically to get to know the person, create rapport, know if there's something in particular that the person wants to clarify or solve in their life, etc. Then the next session, we talk about their relationship to their body. And anyone has a body, right? As far as I know, at least the people in my counseling sessions up to now, although that body can be different, right? I've conducted, and that's how I created this method was as I was doing a study with people with spinal cord injury. So 95% of their body is paralyzed. We can talk about it later if you want. Then we take, in this next session, we move softly to the sense of self. What can you say about yourself? How would you describe your first person experience? And this is again something that, well, yeah, everyone can relate to that. It doesn't feel like we are intimidating them with something they'd never heard of. Then we move to the sense of belonging, which is the third step. Because of course we are not isolated selves in the bunker of solipsism. We are, but this senses can be more or less depleted, right?
Yeah.
So we can have a good bodily sense or a bodily sense that feels depleted, there where we feel that we have issues, etc. The fourth sense is the sense of the possible, which for me is extremely important. You talked about the possible. Philosophy can make things possible. And philosophy can help people have a good sense of the possible, right? There's a lot of things that we do not do because we feel that they're not possible. Uh, and then we can talk about it later. I think the possible is not enough. In the book, I talk a lot about the compossible, which is a Leibnizian concept, which is how the different possibles harmonize in the world. But we'll keep that for later. And then after these sessions, then we are ready to enter the sense of purpose, which is a dimension that is properly human now, I would say. While the other ones, well, we share bodily, animals have a bodily sense. They have kind of a sense of self and belonging, right? We know trees communicate as one, etc. And definitely a sense of the possible. But then when we enter the sense of purpose, then we enter the part that is specifically human and the difficult part, because it's not easy to define a higher purpose, etc. And last but not least, the philosophical sense, which is connect to the worldview, to what big explanation do you start giving to the world. Of course, it's not about being a full-fledged philosopher like Hegel or Spinoza, have a system.
Mhm.
But we do know that people actually live by implicit ideologies. So what's the ideology that explicitly the worldview that explicitly you actually think makes sense instead of being worked, as you said, unconsciously by another ideology. For example, I don't know if you noticed that, but I noticed often that in sessions some people, because we humans, we like to present ourselves as very humanistic, right?
Mhm.
So, but in fact, when you really dig under the surface, you'll see that many humans, they actually believe in this, in the capitalist ideology, like you either kill or are killed, right?
Mhm.
And of course, the world is pretty unfair, and there are a lot of injustice and stupidity, and oh my God, we could make an eternal list on that. And so, but it's not. So that's where I think philosophical health is exactly what you said, that is extremely practically helpful, is that it teaches people not only to adapt to the world as it is, but to empower them to move it slightly towards something that they believe is more fair or more harmonious, depending on the kind of metaphor we'd like to use. So, and I used, since before that, I was using a very beyond method approach, and that's fine too. I mean, we can have great conversations, but I noticed that if you really want people to be articulate when they define their sense of higher purpose and their philosophical sense, doing this progression makes them sharper in stage 5 or 6, as opposed to either going directly to stage 5 or 6, or to have an unstructured approach. So
Mm.
that's why I think the um, the term of values was pertinent, but also for other reasons. So the other reasons are, well, are your values our values? I tend to say, well, no, they're not. They're not. We are 8 billion people on Earth. They're not 8 billion higher purposes to follow. So that's the beauty also of it, is that as we move on the philosophical counseling process, we actually become communal political animals. Like we discover that, well, we are part of a community of people that think like us, whether they're interested in justice, whether they're interested in truth, whether they're interested in other forms that would be compatible with this idea of paradise on earth, which is very connected to Kant's idea of the ethical, where he says, well, an ethical purpose is one that could, in theory, be universalized,
Mm.
right? So, of course, it's not. So there are things that appear to be very seductive, but when you universalize them, you have a problem. So, for example, capitalism relies on the idea that the higher purpose is the full expansion of your self-interest. And then they have this very religious belief, the invisible hand, Adam Smith, that if everyone follows their self-interest, things will magically harmonize. That's an ideology, right? I think it is appealing for some because it's about freedom. But we see that when you universalize that, now where we globalize it, well, what do we have? We have huge inequalities. We have a very small percentage of the human population that who whose self-interests appear to be fulfilled, but we could have a conversation. Is that true? Is Elon Musk a fulfilled guy? Um, let's talk about his back pain and see how it's going to develop, for example.
Mm.
I think he would be much more serene, and I mean, he does great things on the one hand, but I think it's a good example of self-interest man, right? The American self-made man.
Yeah.
So, and people criticize sometimes philosophy. They say, "Oh, but philosophy, you never get to an answer.
Mm.
You're always questioning, right?"
Yes. You get.
Well, I would say it's a spiral. So yes, of course, that's the beauty of philosophy, is that we always question our own truths because we don't want to become dogmatic animals, right? But it is false to say, I think it's a cliche to have this view of the philosopher who is always doubting and changing their mind about this and that. Uh, no, it's a spiral. So we refine, we meet experience, we refine, but we can certainly find a deep orientation. The 5 principles of philosophical health that I've described in the paper. Mental heroism. Yes, we need some courage, very big courage, to be a philosophically healthy person today, right? In our world. I don't even need to explain why, but we can get into the details. The second one, it's in a different order perhaps, but the second one is deep orientation. So it's this idea that okay, we have a higher purpose, and this is something that we could always come back to, that deep orientation, whether it's justice for all, or philosophical health for all, or other. Then comes, I think, very important to critical creativity. So that's where philosophy is indeed a questioning endeavor, because we tend to be critical even of ourselves.
Mm.
But I prefer to call it critical creativity because we do not want to become overly critical, right? Because, of course, then we undermine everything that we do. So it needs to propose, create, and expand a territory at the same time.
Yeah.
The force, and is something that you probably know since you're a counselor, deep listening.
Mm.
And that's something there is actually a scholarly field on deep listening. It comes from studies in musicology, etc. But it's something that we are humans are not very good at, right? Both deep listening to the other, but also to the signs around us, to whatever the world is trying to tell us.
Yeah.
And last but not least, and this is perhaps where my cosmology, the crealectic cosmology, plays a role. I call
I
it the
want to ask you about the,
creative, right?
yeah,
So
about
the
the,
fact that the world is a creative flowing process, and I know you're interested in Whitehead, and that's where my approach is, of course, resonant with process philosophers.
yeah. Yeah, that's something I really wanted to ask you about your concept of this Kriya, what it is and what its connection with process philosophy, uh,
Right,
with Heraclitus and Whitehead. Uh, uh, I think my viewers also want to know this because they know I'm a process philosopher.
right.
Make videos about process philosophy.
Hmm.
You yourself as a YouTuber also. Forgot to mention that in the beginning that you also have a YouTube channel uh,
Hmm.
where you post all kinds of videos, also short videos. But we can talk about
Right,
that
right. I'm
later.
not exactly. I'm not super active, but yes. So one thing that at one point, I like to use YouTube to improvise. I think improvising is really a beautiful, a little bit what we're doing today. But one point what I would do is like I would pick up a random theme and I would improvise 5 minutes about it. But coming back to the creel, I'll share another image with you.
Yeah, please.
So that's the model I stand for, personally, but not only personally in the sense that I've been deploying it, for example, in the energy production company Vattenfall. I use it also
Ah, yeah.
with my consulate. So it's called Cipher Model, because it's the acronym for Crealectic Intelligence and Philosophical Health for Enriched Realities. And and I use two methods. One is the method we already talked about, the Smile pH method, as you can see in the one of the parts of the infinite loop, and we go through these stages. So we start with the person, but the goal is the result is very often that this person opens to the earth, right? In not only in a human collective way, but also in a modern human way. And then the axis of work, which is basically everything that we do to transform the world, right? A very Marxian definition. Writing a book is work. Taking care of a child is work.
Yeah.
Which expands through the crealectic method towards society, and then the loop starts again because in society there are persons. The core of that is that we're trying to produce enriched realities, right? And we can talk about what that would mean. By the way, I've created also a community, and you're welcome to join. It's called Enriched Realities Assembly, where we precisely discuss. Okay, so what is an enriched reality, especially in our world, which is more and more hybrid? And so this conversation is ongoing.
Yeah.
Creolectic method has 5 steps. I will not get into the detail, but that's a more collective method I use in workshops. And it's not only to create new ideas, it's that, but I think one dimension that is very important is the compossibilizing part. Once we have this crazy, various disparate new ideas, uh, we compossibilize. But before I get there, you asked me about the Creel and the connection with process philosophy. So
But also what it means, it's
exactly.
your own invention, this concept, this word, right?
Right. I coined the word, but it is kind of a synonym of other words
Yeah.
like Dao. I think it's very close to the Chinese Dao of Taoism. I think it's very close to what Whitehead calls creativity. I think it's very close to what Deleuze calls difference.
Yeah.
And Heraclitus already talked about this flowing river in which everything changes, and even us. So Creel
Yeah.
is simply made of the word creation and the word real,
Mm.
right? And the term was born in I had a previous life where I wrote novels, and I have a novel that was translated into English. I wrote in French at that time. It's called Paradisa, and it's take place in a virtual world. That's where the word Creel appears. And so Creel is the fact that the deep reality around us is a creative process. Infinite possibility, which some of them are actualized. So it's a mix of Aristotle and Whitehead, right? But
Mm.
also there is Leibniz in it, because I do believe that Creel is compossibilizing. So I'm not going to enter in cosmology, but I wrote about it, for example, in my book published with MIT Press called Being a Neoness.
Mm.
Um, I think it has a lot to do with the one and the multiple. And some people sometimes find it curious. Why did the Greeks spend so much time talking about the one and the multiple? And well, because it's fundamental. I think that the universe is sort of a dynamo. The Creel is both infinite multiplicity, but it's one, because it's one multiplicity. And so there is, at the core of the universe, there is this dynamo between the two faces of the same coin, the one and the multiple. And this is what creates life. And we have in us, speaking of counseling, we have in us this dynamo between one and multiple. We're trying to find a balance, right? Sometimes we're too one, too unified, and then we become rigid. Sometimes we are too multiple, and in some cases it can lead to psychosis. So
Mm.
this is how I use process philosophy in practical settings, to create this loop where we get slowly closer to a more holistic, enriched reality, but informed by the fact that it's a dynamic process. So it's not never fixed once and for all.
Yeah, that's very Whiteheadian. That that there are no fixed stuff. There's no dogmatic certainty anywhere.
Right,
Especially when knowing thyself, you can find a piece somewhere where you can pull it out and say, ah, here, this is myself. But
right,
you it's kind of like when you have a piece of clay, you never really get to a solid shape, but you get something, you get a grip on something, but
Mhm.
there's always be a part of it that's elusive. So you get a
Right.
maybe just a sense of it, an idea of it. That's also a
Mhm.
good word.
Right. But then I don't want to convey to people the idea that, oh, some sort of popular reading of Deleuze, like, oh, everything is surfing. we are schizophrenic. On Monday we are this, on Tuesday we're that. There are techniques known already since the ancient Greeks to give some robustness to the self, right? So one that I really like to mention, because it's very it's sort of not very often mentioned, and there's not very much studied also in academia. It's the medieval motto. So as you know, in the Middle Ages, people had mottos. So M-O-T-T-O, right? And what that means is that they had a phrase, a very short phrase, that that symbolized their higher purpose, and that they kept repeating in their mind to
Mm.
give them that angle, that robustness, which is an active one, right? So it's
Mm.
not an object, it's a perspective. But by repeating it, well, of course, the world becomes what you repeat. So one example that I often give is Joan d'Arc, Joan of Arc. And
Mm.
so her motto was in the name of the heavenly king. So, and why was that very smart for her? Because, well, she didn't say God, she said heavenly king. So if the divine is royalty, then, and if she is the missionary, right? She saw herself the missionary of the divine king. Well,
Mm.
then it was totally normal for her to go directly to the king, the king of France, and say, "Hey, Paul, hey, dude, I know the truth. I can help you," right? Which she would never have done. She was not even aristocracy, and she was a woman. So that gave her something to stand for. That gave her the courage to stand to. So yes, of course, one image that I often give for people who want to understand process philosophy without the concept is like, go on YouTube and look at time-lapse videos, and you will see that if you take your camera, right, and you film slowly, then you accelerate, you will see that in time, in fact, everything is a flow. And if we could have a camera for millions of years, we will see that even this table, this computer, it's a flow from birth to continuation. It will disintegrate. It's just that our temporality makes us think that it's hard. So that's very white heating, right? The
Mm.
fallacy of uh,
Concrete. Yeah.
concreteness, right? Or the wrong concreteness. So yes, so I do think that in the end, it might be that if we're looking for some stability, it would be easier to find some stability more in ideas, right, than in things. And
Right.
that's good news. That's good news because we know, I mean, some people do not agree with that, but I believe the world is built out of ideas. And so philosophy then becomes extremely important because if they have the right ideas, and then of course you need to repeat them and have a perseverant action on them, then you can transform the world.
Yeah. That sounds about right. I also now I think about Plato and his the ideas, eidos from Plato, where that's up there. That's something that lies beyond, and that's what you get a grasp of as a philosopher or in a philosophical counseling session. You get this grasp of these great ideas, but they are ideas, and you can, of course, copy them, but they will always be, in Plato's own words, a copy of that. They will not never be exactly like that idea because that's an ideal. So for me, that's kind of the difference that you can. You talk about paradise, and if you can maybe come close to it, but not never quite, because it is an idea. It is a, a I don't know, utopia or something. But you can
Mm.
get close to
Right.
that through philosophy, with the help of philosophy.
Mm. Right. An ideal, right?
Yeah,
So I realized that we said we would speak for 45 minutes. We've spoken
yeah.
for
It's
1 hour. Maybe we could wrap it up.
Let's do that. I am looking at my questions here. There's one more I would like you to get into before
Mhm.
we end. Uh, what is the difference? Is something you talk about in your book, Philosophical Health, a Practical Introduction. What is the difference between an armchair philosopher and an action philosopher? And which kind of philosopher do you consider yourself?
Right. So of course the answer, you know, that I call myself an action philosopher with some humor, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the action hero, and uh, that doesn't mean that I have a critical view of armchair philosophy. In fact, it's a dialectic. It's important to sit at, like I'm sitting in an armchair now, and we are doing important stuff, right? But usually when we say armchair philosopher, we tend to define people who do not go in the world, who actually, and there's a lot of that in academia. Uh, I'm not gonna name universities, but philosophy departments who tend to think that, oh, using philosophy to help people is dirty, or you see, and probably because they are afraid, right? Because it's a responsibility. Every time you do something in the world, there might be consequences. So an armchair philosopher in that sense would be a little bit of a coward person who believes that they can stay in the solipsism of their cognitive bunker and write books, usually analytic philosophy, that has no practical impact on the world. I talked recently with an analytic philosopher who is working on commitment. So I said, okay, commitment. I'm actually starting, that was a few months ago, I'm starting this new community called Enriched Realities Assembly. And I noticed in my other community, Philosophical Health International, it's hard to get people to do things together. It's harder to get people to commit. It's hard. And I do not have all the recipes for that. So I asked that person, well, you're a specialist of commitment. How do I get people to commit more in these groups? Oh, no, no, no. These are practical example. I'm thinking about the theory of commitment. And so that's ridiculous, right? Of course, it's fantastic to theorize, and I love that. And we can spend 6 months meditating about something, even in a cave, but like Zarathustra. But the beauty of Zarathustra, one of my favorite books of all times, Nietzsche's Zarathustra, is that at one point he comes back. He
Mhm.
says, well, I need to go into the world to help them. And he's ridiculed, right? It's very difficult, but he knows he needs to do that. It's his epistemic duty. So I think philosophy needs to uh, do a great work, especially philosophical departments uh, who are very scared, right? Because they're like, ooh, let's not show to the world that we exist because we might be endangered of disappearing. And in many countries, that's the case. Like they tend to want to close philosophy departments. But I think that's because philosophy departments have only done one side of what philosophy is, beautiful side, thinking, theoretically. And it's important to distance yourself from the world once in a while, but then go back into the world and then show that you can transform the world with philosophy. You can work with engineers. I'm working now with engineers of Vattenfall on philosophical engineering, But it takes courage, right? Because it's messy. Of course, it's much more complicated than writing a theoretical book only. So I think that answers to your question a little bit passionately, but I think I'm quite passionate about it. I think there needs to be in order for philosophy to transform the world, academic philosophy needs to transform itself.
I believe that as well, that we have to transcend from the universities and become more public and real and practical also. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
time to do this, Luis de Miranda. So I'm so glad you wanted to do this. So thank you very much for
It was a
participating.
pleasure, and let's keep in touch. And all the best for the important work that you're doing in also democratizing philosophy and philosophical counseling through YouTube and other channels.
I'm gonna be in this enriched your community. I'm gonna join that. For
Great,
sure.
that's fantastic. And I will tell you how to join it in an email.
And I will put soon. I will put a joint book review video out for you, so I get more extensive into the book and what it's about. But thank you for this talk.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot. And well, take care then.
You
Talk soon.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.